The boy stood at the marble counter with $11 folded into a sandwich bag, and the woman behind the glass looked at him the way you look at a stain on a tablecloth you cannot get out. It was a Tuesday in late August, the kind of heat that makes the air over the parking lot shimmer like water that is not there. Marcus Dell was 14 years old. He had walked 2.5 miles from the east side of Hartley to the Pinewood Savings branch on Commerce Street, past the boarded barber shop and the church that fed people on Wednesdays, because the only thing his grandmother had asked of him that summer was that he learn to keep his own money where nobody could borrow it without asking. He had $11. He had carried it in a freezer bag, so the sweat off his hands would not soften the bills. And he had practiced the sentence he was going to say in the mirror over the bathroom sink, because his grandmother had told him that the way you ask for a thing tells people whether you believe you deserve it. The woman's name was Carol Mercer. She wore a navy blazer with a small gold pin shaped like a key, and she had been a branch manager for 19 years. When Marcus slid the freezer bag under the glass and said the sentence he had practiced, she did not pick the bag up. She let it sit there. She looked at it, then she looked at him, and then she said something that he would carry inside his chest for 11 years like a stone swallowed whole. What she said I will get to. Not yet, though. Because to understand why a grown man walked into that same branch on a cold morning in March, with a folder under his arm and a stillness in him that made a roomful of bankers go quiet, you have to understand the boy first. You have to understand the $11. You have to understand the woman who raised him, and the thing she gave him that no bank on earth could hold, and the long, patient years between the counter and the folder. So stay with me. We are going back. Marcus was raised by his grandmother, Eunice Dell, in a narrow house with a porch that sagged on the left side, and a kitchen that smelled of coffee and starch. His mother had gone north for work when he was 6, and sent money when she could, which was not often, and his father was a name on a birth certificate, and nothing else. Eunice had worked 31 years as a presser at a commercial laundry, standing at a machine that breathed steam into her face 8 hours a day, and her hands, by the time Marcus knew her, were permanently curled, the knuckles swollen, the skin shining. She could not fully open her right hand. She had given it to other people's shirts. She did not talk about being tired. She talked about ledgers. Every Friday, Eunice sat at the kitchen table with a spiral notebook and a stub of a pencil she sharpened with a paring knife, and she wrote down every dollar that had come into the house and every dollar that had left it. She wrote the rent. She wrote the light bill. She wrote the 40 cents she spent on a single lemon to make tea for a neighbor who was sick. The notebook had a marbled cover, black and white, the corners worn soft as cloth, and on the first page, in her careful upright hand, she had written a single line. Marcus read it so many times across his childhood that he could see it with his eyes closed. It said, "Money has no memory, but people do." He did not understand it for years. He thought it meant you should remember where your money went. Later he would understand it meant something larger and harder, something about how a dollar does not care who held it last. But a person remembers exactly how they were treated when they had almost none. The bank would teach him that lesson better than his grandmother ever could. When Marcus was 12, Eunice started giving him the notebook on Fridays. She would sit beside him and read out the numbers, and he would write them in, and she would check his columns. She taught him to add a column twice, once going down and once going up, and if the two answers did not agree, to find his mistake before he trusted either one. She taught him that a number you have not checked is just a hope. She taught him that interest was the one force in the world that worked while you slept, and that most people had it working against them and never once thought to turn it around. She had a phrase for it. She said, "The people who own the building sleep better than the people who clean it, and the only difference between them is who learned to read the lease." Marcus did not know yet that he would spend his life learning to read the lease. The summer he turned 14, Eunice told him it was time. She'd been setting aside coins in a coffee can on the high shelf for him, a little at a time, telling him it was his, and that one day she would teach him to put somewhere safe. That summer, the can held $11 and some change. She counted it out onto the kitchen table, smoothed the bills flat with the heel of her ruined hand, and told him to take it to the bank himself and open an account in his own name. She did not go with him. She said a man opens his own account. She's the way she said most important things, plainly, while doing something else, in this case, shelling peas into a chipped bowl. So he went. He walked the 2.5 miles in the August heat because the bus fare was money, and money was the whole point. He wore his school shirt, the good one, ironed by his grandmother's hands the night before. He carried the freezer bag, and he rehearsed. The branch on Commerce Street was the nicest building Marcus had ever walked into. The floor was real marble, grey with veins of white, and it threw the coal up at him through the soles of his sneakers. There were brass lamps on the counters, and a chandelier that scattered little pieces of light across the ceiling. A guard stood near the door with his hands folded. The air conditioning was so cold it raised the hair on Marcus's arms after the heat of the street, and the whole place smelled of lemon polish and paper. He waited in line behind a man in a suit and a woman with a leather purse the colour of caramel. When it was his turn, he walked to the window, where the brass plate said the manager would see new accounts, and he set the freezer bag on the counter, and he said the sentence he had practiced. "I would like to open a savings account, please. This is my money. I earned some of it, and my grandmother saved the rest." Carol Mercer looked at the bag. She did not touch it. A small smile moved across her mouth, the kind that is not a smile at all, and she looked past Marcus to the woman with the caramel purse, as if to share something. Though the woman was not watching, she said, "Honey, this isn't a piggy bank." She said the minimum to open an account was $25, which was not true for the account a 14-year-old could open, though Marcus had no way to know that. She said that the bank's time was valuable, and that perhaps he would be more comfortable somewhere that handled smaller amounts. She said the word smaller the way you might hold something between two fingers to drop it in the trash. And then she said the thing. She leaned forward slightly, lowered her voice as though doing him a kindness, and said, "People like you do better keeping cash at home. You understand, you'll only lose it here in fees. People like you." Marcus was 14. He did not have a word yet for what those 3 words did to the inside of his body. His ears went hot. His hands, which had carried $11 2.5 miles without letting them get damp, began to sweat through the plastic. He felt the guard's eyes on his back. He felt the cold marble through his sneakers. He felt very small and very visible at the same time, which is a particular kind of pain, and he understood without being told that everyone in that bright, cold room had decided something about him, before he opened his mouth, and that the $11 had only confirmed it. He did not argue. His grandmother had not raised him to argue with people who had already decided. He picked up the freezer bag. He said thank you, because she had also raised him to be the most dignified person in any room, especially a room that did not deserve it. And he walked out across the marble and past the guard and into the wall of August heat, and he did not cry until he was 4 blocks away and certain no one from that building could see him. That night he did not tell his grandmother what the woman had said. He told her the bank was closed. It was the only lie he ever told her, and he told it to protect her, because he knew that if Eunice Dell heard the words "people like you" spoken to her grandson, over $11 she had. Saved a coin at a time with hands that could no longer open, it would do something to her that he was not willing to cause. He sat on the sagging porch that night, and he made himself a promise that he was too young to know how to keep. He promised that one day he would walk back into that building, and that the building would be different when he left it. He was 14. He did not know how. He only knew that he would. Here is what you need to understand about the years that followed. They were not a story of luck. There was no scholarship that fell from the sky, no stranger who saw something special in him and opened a door. What there was the notebook, and the lesson of the 2 columns, and a boy who had been told that money would only betray him deciding to learn money so well that it could never surprise him again. Marcus went to the public library after school, the branch on Foster with the leaking roof, and the librarian named Mr. Ibarra, who kept the personal finance shelf better stocked than the budget allowed because he believed it mattered. Mr. Ibarra was a thin man from somewhere Marcus never asked about, with reading glasses pushed up into grey hair, and he noticed the boy who came every day and sat in the same chair near the radiator and did not get up until closing. The third week, without a word, Mr. Ibarra set a book on the table beside Marcus, a thick one with a cracked spine, and tapped it twice with one finger and walked away. It was a book on how interest compounds across decades. Marcus read it 3 times. After that, every few days, there was a new book waiting on the table, chosen by a man who said almost nothing and saw almost everything. Marcus read everything on that shelf. He read books written for adults with mortgages, and books written for people starting businesses, and books with charts. He did not understand until he made himself understand them, sitting with a sheet of scrap paper and a pencil, and refusing to turn the page till the chart had given up its meaning. He took Eunice's marbled notebook, and he started a second one of his own, a cheap one with a green cover from the drugstore, and in it he did not just record what he spent, he recorded what he learned. Compound interest, amortization, the difference between an asset that fed you and a liability that ate you. He wrote each definition in his own words, then crossed it out and wrote it again plainer, then again plainer still, until the words were small enough to carry and true enough to keep, until they were his and not the book's. He wrote on one page a sentence he had reasoned out himself and underlined twice. A building is just a promise that someone signs and someone else collects, and the only question worth asking is which end of that promise you are standing on. He got a job at 15 bagging groceries at the Foodland on Reese Street, and he did not spend his wages. The work paid $4.25 an hour, and he worked the after-school shift and a double on Saturdays. And at the end of his first 2 weeks, he held a check for $91 and felt something he had no name for, which was the feeling of money that had not been borrowed, lost or refused, money that was simply his because he had stood on a concrete floor and earned it. He opened an account, finally, at a small credit union across town called Riverside Mutual, a low brick building with no marble and no chandelier, and a window unit that dripped onto a folded towel. A teller named Gloria sat him down at her own desk, not behind glass but beside her, and she called him sweetheart in a way that meant it, and she turned her monitor so he could see it, and she walked him line by line through how to read his own statement. She showed him the deposit. She showed him the date. She showed him the small word at the bottom that said interest, and she explained what it meant. The credit union was paying him for the use of his money the way a landlord is paid for the use of a room. Marcus saved. He brought his check every 2 weeks, and he sat with Gloria, and he watched the number climb, and he learned the rhythm of a balance that only went up because he never once withdrew from it. The first time the interest posted 11 cents, he saw it on the statement, and he walked out to the parking lot and laughed out loud, alone beside the dripping window unit, because 11 cents was small and ridiculous, and it was also the engine, finally running in his direction. $11 had been refused at one counter. 11 cents had been handed to him freely at another. He understood that the difference between those 2 buildings was not the marble. It was who they had decided he was before he spoke. He studied the way some people pray. Una was finding at the kitchen table at midnight with the lamp pulled close and a book open and her old notebook beside his new one, and she would put her ruined hand on the back of his neck and stand there a moment, and then she would go to bed without a word, because she understood that what he was doing was sacred, and that the worst thing you can do to a person in the middle of their becoming is interrupt it. He learned faster than his teachers could keep up with. A guidance counselor at Hartley High named Mr. Reyes that the boy who bagged groceries was correcting the economics textbook in the margins, and he did the one useful thing an institution sometimes does, which is to get out of the way and point. He told Marcus about a community college program that fed into a state university, about financial aid forms, about a path. He did not carry Marcus down it. He pointed at it. The walking was Marcus's. Marcus was 19 when Eunice died. It was her heart in the night, quietly the way she had done everything. He found her in the morning in her chair by the window with the marbled notebook in her lap, open to a fresh page where she had begun that week's ledger, and gotten as far as the rent before she stopped. The pencil had rolled to the floor. Marcus sat on the floor beside her chair for a long time before he called anyone, and he did not write anything in the notebook for 2 years after that, because some columns you cannot bring yourself to close. He kept the notebook. He kept the coffee can. He kept the paring knife-sharpened pencil. And he kept the line on the first page, "Money has no memory, but people do." And now it had a second meaning he had not asked for, which was that the people we love leave us, but the way they taught us to live does not. He almost stopped. Grief is a kind of cold that gets into the engine. For a season he went to work and came home and did nothing, and the books stayed closed. What turned him back was not inspiration. It was a notice in the mail, a property tax bill on the narrow house with the sagging porch, the house Eunice had owned outright after 31 years of pressing other people's shirts, and the realization that if he did not understand the systems that governed that house, he would lose the one thing she had managed to own. He opened a book again out of fear. He kept reading out of love. By the time he finished the community college program, he was first in it, and the state university gave him the aid that made the rest possible, and he worked the whole way through, nights and weekends, and he did not borrow a dollar he had not calculated to the penny how he would return. He studied finance. Not the kind that makes noise on television, the kind that buys quiet buildings and holds them. He learned that banks themselves were assets, that branches were bought and sold like any other property, that the institution which had looked at a boy with $11 and seen nothing was itself a thing that could be valued, weighed, and owned. He did not say this dream out loud to anyone. He kept it where Eunice had taught him to keep the things that mattered, in a column nobody else could read. After university, he took a position at a regional investment firm in the city 2 hours north, a firm that managed acquisitions of small commercial properties and community financial institutions. He was good. He was better than good, because he had a thing the others did not have, which was that he had stood on the other side of the glass. The men he worked with analyzed branches as numbers on a page. Marcus could read a branch the way Eunice read a lease. He could walk into a small bank and feel within 10 minutes which ones were healthy, and which were rotting from neglect, which managers had stopped caring, which deposit bases were quietly leaving for the credit union across town. He did not guess. He checked his columns twice. He rose. By 23 he was leading acquisitions. By 24 he had personally structured the purchase of 4 small institutions, turning each one around not by cutting but by remembering, by training tellers to treat the woman with $11, exactly the way they treated the man in the suit, because he had learned from the credit union that the $11 customer who is treated like a person becomes the $11,000 customer who never leaves. There was a meeting the spring he turned 24, that the firm still talked about afterward. A senior partner had wanted to close 2 branches in a county that looked, on paper, like dead weight, low balances, aging deposit base, a building that needed a roof. Marcus asked for 2 weeks. He drove out and sat in the lobby of one of those branches for a full day, watching the way he had once been watched, and he counted the people who came in, and he listened to how they were spoken to, and he found a teller who knew every customer's name and a manager who had been quietly carrying the place on her own care for a decade. He came back and put a single page in front of the partner. He did not argue. He showed her the columns, checked twice, and he showed that the branch was not dying. It was bleeding to a credit union 11 blocks away that simply treated people better, and that the cost of fixing that was less than the cost of the roof they were already willing to pay. The branch stayed open. 18 months later, it was the strongest performer in its region. His superiors thought it was sentiment. The numbers proved it was strategy. Both things were true. The best strategies usually are someone's healed wound. He never forgot Pinewood Savings on Commerce Street. He had watched it from a distance for years, the way you watch a weather front. He knew before most people did that Pinewood was in trouble, that the parent company had overextended, that several of its branches were being quietly marked for sale. He knew the Commerce Street branch was among them, and he knew because he made it his business to know that Carol Mercer was still its manager, 19 years become 30, that she had never been promoted past that floor, that she ran it the same way she had run it. The August afternoon, a boy walked 2.5 miles to be told that people like him did better keeping cash at home. He did not gloat. I want to be careful here because the easy version of this story is a story about revenge, and that is not what this was. Marcus did not want to hurt Carol Mercer. He had stopped thinking about Carol Mercer as a person to defeat somewhere around the time he understood compound interest. What he wanted was older and quieter than revenge. He wanted to walk back into that room as the person he actually was, and he wanted the room to have no choice but to see it. There is a difference between wanting someone to suffer and wanting the truth to be undeniable. The first is a poison, the second is a kind of justice. Marcus had spent 11 years choosing the second one-checked column at a time. The firm authorized the acquisition. Marcus asked to lead it personally, which surprised no one, since the Commerce Street branch was a modest property, and he was now leading deals 10 times its size. But he made the case that the location had strategic value, and it did, and that was true too. The most disciplined thing about Marcus was that he never had to lie. He had built a life in which the things he wanted and the things that were defensible were the same things. That is its own kind of freedom, and almost no one achieves it. So now we come back to the morning in March. It was cold, the kind of cold that makes the marble of an old bank floor feel like the inside of a refrigerator. Marcus Dell was 25 years old. He wore a charcoal overcoat, not because he wanted to impress anyone, but because it was cold. And under his arm he carried a leather folder, plain the colour of dark coffee, and inside it were the executed documents for the purchase of the branch on Commerce Street and 4 others in the same portfolio. He did not have to come in person. The closing could have been handled by lawyers in an office 2 hours away. He came in person because there was a sentence he had carried for 11 years, and he intended to set it down in the room where it had been handed to him. He walked across the marble. His shoes did not squeak now. They were good shoes, and they made no sound at all on the cold grey stone, and that silence was its own quiet argument, a boy's sweating sneakers grown into a man's silent step. The chandelier still scattered its little pieces of light. The brass lamps were the same lamps. The air still smelled of lemon polish and paper. For a moment Marcus stood just inside the door and let the cold of the place rise through him, and he was 14 again, and the freezer bag was in his hand. And then he was not, because he had done the work that turns a memory from a wound into a fact. A young teller greeted him, a man of perhaps 20 with a nervous tie. Marcus asked courteously to see the branch manager. He gave his name. The teller went to a desk near the back, and Marcus watched Carol Mercer look up. She was older. The navy blazer was a different navy, with the same idea, and the little gold key pin was still on the lapel. Her hair had gone grey, and she had let it. She did not recognize him. Of course she did not. The last time she had seen his face it had belonged to a 14-year-old, and she had spent maybe 90 seconds looking at it, and in those 90 seconds she had not been seeing a face at all. She rose and came toward him with the smooth, professional warmth of someone who has been told an important buyer has arrived. And she extended her hand and she said, "Mr. Dell, welcome. We're honoured to have you." Marcus shook her hand. Her grip was firm. He noticed that her hand was beginning to curl the way his grandmother's had, the early architecture of a body that has worked too long. And something in him that he had expected to feel hard went soft instead, and he was not sorry about that, because Eunice had not raised him to enjoy another person's smallness, even this person's, even now. The closing took place at the long table in the conference room behind the manager's desk, the room where Marcus, at 14, had imagined the important decisions of the world were made. There were lawyers from the parent company, a representative from Marcus's firm, and Carol Mercer, who was present because protocol required the sitting manager to be present at the transfer of a branch she would, under the new ownership, continue to manage. She did not yet know that last part. She thought that morning that the new owner might keep her or might not, and the knot was a cold thing sitting under her professional warmth, And Marcus could see it, the way he could always see the thing a person was trying not to show. He signed where the folder told him to sign. He did not rush. He checked each page. Twice the way Eunice had taught him to check a column, because a document you have not read is just a hope, and Marcus Dell did not build a life on hope. When the last signature was dry, the branch on Commerce Street, with its marble floor and its brass lamps and its chandelier and its 19 years become 30 manager belonged to him. The lawyers shook hands. The representative from his firm offered congratulations. And then there was the small, quiet pause that comes at the end of every transaction, the moment where everyone gathers their papers, and into that pause Marcus did the thing he had come 2 hours and 11 years to do. He took from the inner pocket of his overcoat a sandwich bag. It was a freezer bag, the kind with the seal, and inside it were 11 $1 bills, old ones, soft with handling, and some change. He set it on the conference table in front of Carol Mercer, exactly the way a boy had set it on a counter, and he said, in a voice that was calm and unhurried and carried no anger at all, "I would like to open a savings account, please. This is my money. I earned some of it and my grandmother saved the rest." The room did not understand. The lawyers looked at the bag, then at Marcus, then at each other. Carol Mercer, though, understood. I do not know exactly when the recognition reached her, whether it was the words which were the words, or the freezer bag, which was the freezer bag, or something in his face that the years suddenly stripped back to 14. What I know is that her own hand went to the table to steady her, and the colour left her face from the top down, the way water drains from a glass, and she did not say anything for a long moment, because there was nothing in 19 become 30 years of professional training that prepares a person for the past walking in and buying the building. She said his name. "Not Mr. Dell this time," she said. "Marcus, the way you say a thing you are remembering and dreading in the same breath." And Marcus understood that she had carried it too, that the sentence she handed him had not vanished from her the moment he walked out the door, that money has no memory but people do, and that she had been one of the people all along. He did not make a speech. The easy version of this story has a speech, and there was none. He simply looked at her and he said, quietly, so that only she and the few people near them could hear, "You told me once that people like me did better keeping cash at home. I want you to know I kept that. I kept it for 11 years. It's the reason I'm sitting here, that was all." He did not raise his voice. He did not ask her to apologize. He did not tell the room what she had done. He gave her the truth and he let the silence do the rest. And the silence did more than any speech could have, because the lawyers and the representative and the nervous young teller, standing in the doorway, had all heard enough to understand the shape of what had happened, and the room rearranged itself around that understanding without a single additional word. Now, what happened to Carol Mercer is the part of the story that people most want to be cruel, and the part where Marcus most refused to be. He kept her on, not out of weakness and not as a humiliation dressed up as mercy, but because he had learned from the credit union and from his own 4 acquisitions that you do not heal an institution by burning it down. You heal it by changing what it believes about who deserves the door. He kept Carol Mercer as manager of the Commerce Street branch, and he sat with her the following week, just the two of them at the conference table, and he did not lecture her. He told her about Eunice. He told her about the laundry and the curled hands and the marbled notebook and the line on the first page. He told her about the 2.5 miles in the August heat and the lie he had told his grandmother to protect her. He told her about the 11 cents of interest he had laughed at in a parking lot. And he told her that the branch was going to operate, from that day forward, on one principle, which was that the person with $11 was to be treated exactly as the person with 11,000, because the first one was the second one before the world had finished deciding. He did not threaten her job. He gave her a standard to meet. There is a difference, and Carol Mercer, to her credit, understood it and met it, and a thing in her that had been bent for 30 years began, slowly, to straighten. People can change when the truth is placed in front of them without a weapon attached. Most institutions never learn this. Marcus had decided to build one that had. He renamed nothing after himself. The branch kept its name. He did do one thing quietly, the kind of quiet his grandmother would have recognized. In the small lobby, on the wall beside the door where every person entering would pass it, he had mounted a single-framed page. It was not a portrait of him. It was a photograph of a page from a marbled notebook, black and white cover worn soft at the corners, and on the page, in a careful upright hand, was a single line: "Money has no memory, but people do." No name, no explanation. Just the line where the woman with $11 and the man in the suit would both walk past it on their way to the counter, and some of them would slow down, and some of them would not, and that was all right, because the ones who needed it would be the ones who stopped. Marcus went on. The firm made him a partner before he was 28. He bought other branches, other small institutions, and he ran them all on the $11 principle, and the strange thing, the thing his colleagues never fully believed, even as the numbers proved it year after year, was that it worked. That dignity was not charity, but the soundest deposit strategy anyone in that company had ever seen. He set up a program, run out of every branch he owned, that brought in teenagers from the east sides of their cities and taught them what Eunice had taught him at the kitchen table, the two columns, the checked sum, the engine of interest turning in their direction. He did not name the program after himself. He named it after a laundry presser most of the children would never hear the full story of. He called it the Eunice Dell Foundation for Financial Literacy, and on the wall of its first small office he hung the coffee can, empty now, on a little shelf at the height where a 14-year-old's eyes would find it. Carol Mercer retired 4 years later, on her own terms, with a pension intact and a letter of recommendation signed by the man whose savings account she had once refused to open. She framed the letter. Marcus heard about that second-hand and said nothing. But I am told he was glad, and I believe it, because the whole point of what he built was that a person is not the worst thing they ever did, provided they are willing to become something better when the truth arrives. Here is the thing I want to leave with you, and I want you to take it personally, because it was meant personally. Somewhere right now there is a boy or a girl standing at a counter with $11 in a freezer bag, and someone is looking at them the way you look at a stain, and deciding in 90 seconds the whole of who they are. The person behind the glass is almost always wrong. They are wrong because they are reading the shoes and not the lease. They are wrong because they think the amount on the counter is the measure of the person, when the measure of the person is what they will do with 11 years. You may be the one at the counter. If you are, I want you to hear what Eunice Dell told her grandson at a kitchen table while shelling peas into a chipped bowl, which is that the people who own the building sleep better than the people who clean it, and the only difference between them is who learned to read the lease. Nobody is coming to hand you the building. The lease, though, and the librarian kept the shelf stocked, and the engine of interest does not care who you are, only that you turned it the right way, and you may be the one behind the glass. If you are, then I want you to remember that money has no memory, but people do, that the boy with the freezer bag will remember your face for 11 years, and that one cold morning he may walk back across the marble as the owner of everything you thought you were protecting from him. Be the kind of person he is glad to forgive. It costs you nothing today, and it is the only thing that will matter then. Marcus still has the notebook. He keeps it in a drawer in an office on a high floor, and on Friday evenings, out of habit and out of love, he still opens it sometimes and runs his thumb down a column his grandmother started. And he finished, and he checks it twice, going down and going up, the way she taught him, because a number you have not checked is just a hope, and because somewhere in the checking she is still beside him, her ruined hand on the back of his neck, watching her grandson finish the math.